some major developments in Donald Trump trying to cover up his dark past. Trump's DOJ made an emergency filing that deserves more attention at the end of last week, begging a federal judge not to release the names of two individuals who are currently anonymous, who received major payments from Jeffrey Epstein on or around the time that the Miami Herald was writing some exposés regarding Epstein, right around that critical period where Epstein was rearrested and shortly before Epstein died, allegedly by suicide. And I'm emphasizing the allegedly part right there. I want to go into what went down with Trump's DOJ, telling this judge, please, judge, don't release these names. Please don't release these names. Judge Berman's going to have a big decision about what to do there. Then separately, Daily Beast got an incredible story. My friend Joanna Coles interviewed a former model, Australian model, Cleo Glide, and she would kind of hang out with Epstein during the late 80s, early 90s, and she told the Daily Beast exclusively that Epstein would make her dress like a sexy nurse for Donald Trump. We've got the video there. Great work, Joanna. I want to show that to you. Then there's, of course, the Midas Touch exclusive from the end of last week, where we interviewed Spencer Kuvin, the lawyer for the first Epstein victim who came forward, and then several other Epstein victims who came forward early on. He took multiple depositions of Jeffrey Epstein and co-conspirators. He was thinking about doing the deposition of Donald Trump, but he had incredible insight into what will be in these Epstein files that the Trump regime is covering up. And then, of course, you had at the end of last week, Donald Trump saying that everything relating to Epstein is a total hoax. It is a Democratic hoax, he says, in order to hurt Donald. He centers himself at the center of this story. And then you have MAGA Mike Johnson on Friday saying, actually, Donald Trump never said it was a hoax, after Donald Trump literally said it was a hoax, because MAGA Mike Johnson says that Donald Trump was actually the FBI informant that got Epstein arrested in 2006, 2007. So wouldn't that then mean that Donald Trump was responsible for the sweetheart non-prosecution agreement that basically then let Epstein off so he can be a further predator? What was interesting about MAGA Mike Johnson saying that on Friday is that it actually aligns with what Michael Wolff, Donald Trump's former biographer and someone who was potentially going to be a biographer for Jeffrey Epstein, says. But Donald Trump's not the good guy in this informant stories, as informants are often embroiled in the underlying conduct. But what Wolff said that Epstein told him is that Donald Trump was involved in a shady real estate deal with a Russian oligarch, a fertilizer billionaire oligarch from Russia, who purchased a home from Donald Trump in 2008 for double the price that Donald Trump paid a few years earlier, where Jeffrey Epstein was going to buy that home in West Palm Beach. Asked Donald Trump for a little bit of advice. Donald Trump comes in, scoops up the home from underneath Epstein. Epstein's pissed because Epstein was just asking for Donald Trump's advice about where to move the pool or whether to keep the pool there. Donald Trump painted the home a little bit, in his own words, then sold it to this Russian fertilizer oligarch for like $90 million when he paid like $41 million for it. Then the Russian oligarch proceeded to demolish the entire home, claiming that there was mold on it. Epstein was wondering, could this be money laundering? What the hell was happening? That got Donald Trump nervous, according to what Epstein told Wolff. And then Epstein said, because Donald Trump knew all of the stuff we were getting into potentially together, Donald Trump may have been a person who then tipped off the feds and the local police to say what I was doing because he knew intimately what I was doing. Not as the good guy, as someone who, as Michael Wolff also said, he saw photos. This is what he claims. Wolff says he saw photos that Epstein showed him of Donald Trump with girls of indeterminate age, wasn't sure, they looked very young, topless, and Donald Trump had a stain on his crotch. And the girls were pointing and laughing at Donald Trump, according to what Wolff said that Epstein showed him, and that those photos would be in the vault and potentially in the Epstein files, along with other references to Donald Trump's name. Now, we know that Donald Trump also is Doe 174. How do we know that? There are civil cases. We don't have the actual file of what happened with Doe 174, but in connection with civil cases, Trump has a designation, Doe 174. That was his alias there. So we should find more about Doe 174. We should get the data that Spencer Kuvin, the lawyer for Epstein's victims, survivors, has given us a roadmap of what we need. What a great interview. It's done over 1 million views. But let me start at the outset with this great NBC scoop right here. DOJ says the names of 2 associates Epstein wired $100,000 and $250,000 to should stay secret. The Justice Department came after NBC asked a federal judge to unseal the names of 2 people Epstein paid and helped protect from prosecution. Release the names of those involved. Seems like a pretty basic request. But the DOJ that says, oh, we're all for transparency, you're covering up these names as well? Here's the letter from the DOJ so you can actually see the source document itself. Dear Judge Berman, the government respectfully submits this letter pursuant to the court's order dated August 26, 2025 in opposition to the motion filed by NBC News on August 13th. For the reasons set forth below, as well as those set forth in the government's prior memoranda, the government submits that the motion should be denied. The motion seeks to unseal the names of 2 individuals referenced in a letter filed by the government on July 16, 2019. The government will refer to the individuals referenced on the first page of July 2019 letter, beginning first as individual 1, and the individual referenced in the same page in the paragraph beginning second as individual 2. Then it goes on to say that individual 1 and individual 2 are expressing that they don't want their names released, and as such, the government is defending them and supporting that. This motion to release these names of individual 1 and 2 should be denied, among other reasons, to protect the privacy interests of individuals 1 and individual 2. The relevant standard is set forth in United States v. Amodia. So you kind of just told on yourself. Didn't you previously say you wanted this information released from the court? Oh, now you don't want to release? Oh, you wanted what? The grand jury testimony released, which was done in 1 day and had no information that would be relevant to what people are looking for. But when there is information that people want to see, like who is complicit, who was involved, who is getting paid by Epstein, you want to block that. And now you cite the case law that you claim didn't apply to the grand jury stuff to now block this stuff because you knew the grand jury stuff would always remain confidential because there's a federal rule of civil procedure which prevents that from being released in the first place. The Department of Justice goes on to say, because individual 1 and 2 have expressly objected to unsealing their names, we support that. The government respectfully submits that the names should remain sealed to protect their legitimate privacy interests. Oh, so once again, you have the Trump DOJ protecting the legitimate privacy interest of these individuals. What about the interest of the Epstein survivors and the victims who want justice and who want this release? From that NBC article, they talked about how the first associate that the government wants to block the release of their name received a payment of $100,000 from Epstein, and the second associate received a payment of $250,000 in 2018, days after the Miami Herald began publishing a series of investigative stories where victims criticized a plea deal he received in Florida in 2008. The first associate received a payment of $100,000, and then the second one was $250,000. As part of the plea agreement, Epstein secured the non-prosecution agreement. Prosecutors wrote that on November 30th, 2018, Epstein wired from a trust account he controlled to an individual named Redacted, a potential co-conspirator, and for whom Epstein protection in the NPA. So a potential co-conspirator as well. And then the government said just 3 days later, on December 3rd, 2018, the defendant wired $250,000 from the same trust to a name Redacted, who was also named as a potential co-conspirator. We want to know who these names are, yet the DOJ is covering it up. And one of the things we learned, and I got to give the guy credit, James O'Keefe, he did a good report here. He sent someone undercover, a female, who went on a dating site called Hinge. She went on a date or 2 dates undercover with Trump's DOJ Deputy Chief, Joseph Schnitt, the active Deputy Chief. That's an appropriate last name for him, Joseph Schnitt. And Schnitt said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to redact all references to Republicans and Trump, and any reference to a Democrat will leave. And of course, we're bringing Ghislaine Maxwell to the minimum security facility to keep her damn mouth shut. That's Trump's acting deputy chief of the FBI, one of the top positions right there. Now, we know from the Wall Street Journal exclusive a few months back that the Justice Department told Trump in May that his name is among many in the Epstein files. Of course it is, because we know, based on the files that have been released already, a very small portion. Trump's name's all over him. He's all over the flight logs. He's all over the call logs. He's in the black book. He said that Epstein's a great guy who likes women on the younger side, beautiful women on the younger side. He said, you're the greatest person ever, Epstein. Trump denies that he sent Epstein that birthday card back in whatever it was, the early 2000s, but it seems obvious that he was the one who did it. The estate of Epstein is getting subpoenaed to release those records, but let me share with you, I think, some great reporting by the Daily Beast. They got Australian model Cleo Guide to sit down with my friend Joanna Cole to share her unsettling memories of what happened with Epstein and Trump in the late 80s and early 90s. At just 22, she was living in the height of the fashion world. She was signed to Ford Models, immersed in the club scene. She became friends with Epstein, and then Epstein made her wear a nurse outfit to see Donald Trump. Here, play this clip.
He mentioned, I had this white wrap over dress, and he said, oh my God, you look just like a nurse in that. It'd be really fun if we got this other mutual friend that had introduced us. Why don't we both go over to Donald's, and you both look like nurses, and I'll just knock on the door and we'll go to Trump Tower and it'll be hilarious. And it kind of, you know, looking back, obviously, it's like there's something kind of mortifying about that story, about me putting myself in that Benny Hill position, and being like sort of on Jeffrey's arm going to Donald Trump's. It's completely surreal. I mean, right. It's really mental. But at the time, it just felt like a bit of fun. And obviously now I look back and go, okay, it's a very odd story, and especially when it blew up into this global horror show.
That's her talking about being in a nurse outfit. Here she is just talking generally about her experience at that time. Here, play this clip.
Today, we're actually talking to someone who spent a lot of time with Jeffrey Epstein. She was a friend of Jeffrey Epstein. She actually went to Donald Trump's apartment with Jeffrey Epstein and has a fascinating insight on what it was like living in that model culture in the late 80s and the early 90s, when Donald Trump was a colossus on the New York landscape, and Jeffrey Epstein was his friend, often offering to bail him out when he was dealing with his bankruptcies. Cleo Glide was a model for Saint Laurent when she was in her late teens. She was literally spotted on a school trip in Paris and became one of the top models in the world. She strode the Thierry Mugler couture catwalks. And of course, she became friends with some of New York's players, one of which was Jeffrey Epstein. And now, of course, she looks back through a completely different lens, the lens of being a mother, the lens of being a working woman. But at the time, she was on the adventure of her life.
Here she talks about being showed off to Donald Trump. Let's play it.
And what was the relationship like between him and Jeffrey?
They seemed warm and friendly, Jeffrey was kind of a bit boasty about knowing Donald. Donald was much more famous than him at that time, So I think he loved kind of accentuating the connection. He probably was showing off Donald to us and us to Donald.
And here she talks about Epstein bragging about helping Trump get out of bankruptcy and lending Trump his plane. Play this clip.
And what was Jeffrey's relationship like with Donald Trump?
He spoke about him as somebody that I think he felt that that was at a time when Donald Trump was going through some bankruptcy issues, and he definitely he kind of was a little boasty about the fact he lent him his plane, and I've helped him out a lot, and definitely the sense that he was the power center at the time.
So perfectly normal informant stuff. Right, MAGA Mike? Remember, here's what MAGA Mike said on Friday, that Trump was the FBI informant, everybody. Here, play this clip.
He's not saying that what Epstein did is a hoax. It's a terrible, unspeakable evil. He believes that himself. When he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant to try to take this stuff down. The president knows and has great sympathy for the women who have suffered these unspeakable harms. It's detestable to him. He and I have spoken about this as recently as 24 hours ago.
Okay. Sure, MAGA Mike. Sure, MAGA Mike. I had the opportunity to speak to Spencer Kuvin, a great lawyer, represented the earliest Epstein victims to come forward. Here's what he explained to me would be in the Epstein files. Play this clip.
He didn't keep a list of these people. What he would do is he would get calls from men, powerful men that were coming into town that lived in Palm Beach, for example, and they would call the home and they would say, "Hey, I'm in town." They would then talk to Miss Maxwell. Maxwell would then send a girl out to the house. That's how the operation would work. So if you really wanted to see exactly who was contacting Epstein and trying to get women, you look at his phone books. You look at his phone records. The phone message pads were obtained during the search warrant of the home back then. That's the first place we looked.
Oh, so it'd be things like this: the call log, important message, by and between Epstein and Donald Trump. Got it. And then remember, here's what Donald Trump said last week. He said that it's all a hoax. He said everything Epstein's a hoax. So let me understand, MAGA Mike. He was an informant in the biggest hoax. He was the hero, but he doesn't want to release the files. Makes a lot of sense, MAGA Mike. Ridiculous. We're not believing this crap. But here's Donald Trump saying that it's all a Democratic hoax and that the DOJ was subpoenaed and turned over all the files. And so there's nothing left to do. See you later. We're done here. Well, that's clearly not the case. They didn't turn over the files. The only thing they've turned over were things that were already turned over. Turn over the 3 terabytes of information that exists. That's a massive amount of 3 terabytes of documents. Let's see those. And we know your name's on it. So let's see if you're really the hero in the story, Donald, because I think you're probably not the hero. Here, play this clip of Trump.
Nobody's going to talk about, because they're going to talk about the Epstein, whatever. I understand that we were subpoenaed to give files, and I understand we've given thousands of pages of files. And I know that no matter what you do, it's going to keep going. And I think it's enough, because I think we should talk about the greatness of our country and the success that we're having. I think we're probably having, according to what I read, even from 2 people in this room, we're having the most successful 8 months of any president ever. And that's what I want to talk about. That's what we should be talking about, not the Epstein hoax.
Well, there you have it, folks. Let me know what you think. Hit subscribe. Let's